tonight's presentation is a closeout of another year of programs. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I want to mention that we already have one scheduled for January 4th, 2024.
Wow.
Robert Gibbons will be returning. Mr. Gibbons has presented several programs for our group over the years, but this one coming up will have a little bit of a different focus. We will be helping beginning genealogy researchers build their family tree. We're calling it, we've titled it Genealogy 101. And Mr. Gibbons has already given me a little PowerPoint folder on what he is going to be presenting, and it is detailed using online tools from Family Search, which are available at no cost. So if you know of someone who has expressed an interest in getting the genealogy research bug, it would be an excellent way for them to learn about genealogy and about researching and things like that and how to build their family tree. And that will again be our January 4th, 2024 meeting. Our speaker tonight, Michael Semas, is from Hanford, where he works as a certified public accountant when he's not doing history shows. He is a history buff, I think it's safe to say. He was last here just over a year ago. That was in September of 22. At that time, he presented what turned out to be one of our more popular programs, the one on the history of Tulare Lake. Now, he has told me already that he has got another presentation of that program coming up, so you can ask him where it will be and when. He might share that with you. Tonight, Mr. Semas will bring us another look back at the one on the people who originally populated this southern end of the San Joaquin Valley. So would you join with me, please, in welcoming Michael Semas.
I've been told to turn on the microphone. Can you hear me? I can actually hear myself. Hello. I'm glad that you all came here. Thank you very much. Try to stay out of the screen here. My name is Michael Semas. I just celebrated my 40th year as a CPA. As an accountant, 38 years as a CPA. And boy, I'm ready to go, let it go, but I can't do it yet. Too many people depend on me, both professionally and personally. Tonight's presentation is something that I put together a year ago, being inspired by one of my former clients. I was hired in 1990-1991 by the Santa Rosa Rancheria Tachi tribe that runs a casino out in Lemoore. And when I was hired by them, they just had a bingo hall. They had no slot machines, they had nothing, just a little bingo hall. And I worked for them for about 10 years and saw them develop from a bingo hall to a full-fledged casino. During that time, had an opportunity to speak with a lot of the old-timers. Most of them are not with us anymore. And they shared with me stories of their heritage. And I always wanted to do something in terms of sharing that heritage in a slide presentation, so that's what I got here. And I call it Before the White Man, because that's what they would say. It's before the white guy, before you white guys got here. And so the thing is that not only, I like to talk about some of the research material that I have in my collection that I use to put together some of the more factual information regarding the tribes. One of the best books I have is the Tachioca's Indians of the San Joaquin Valley, done by Marjorie Cummings. And what we have here on the front, this is Clarence Atwell Sr. This is in the 1930s when he was dancing to earn his medicine. Medicine was his power within the tribe to be able to be their mentor, their guide, and their spiritual leader. And so that's just a picture of him dancing to earn his medicine. The other book I have is called The Handbook of the Yoka Indians. It was written by Frank Latta. If you are familiar with local history, you know Mr. Latta has done quite a few books of local history. This is unique in terms of identifying the culture of the Yokuts Indians, which were here in the Central Valley. It's a fascinating read. It's a very difficult book to find. If you do find it, buy it. Don't cry about the price because you'll never see it again. Another book I have is Handbook of the Indians of California. Talks a lot about basketry and the different tribes that were in California. And also the destruction of the California Indians. And part of my show tonight is going to discuss that particular aspect, the destruction of the California Indians. And it is quite sad. Another book, which I found by chance, is called Vanishing Landscapes, Land and Life in the Tulare Lake Basin, written by Mr. William Preston. Mr. Preston is a professor over at San Luis Obispo, and this is the definite book on Tulare Lake, how it was developed, and how it transformed from the beginning of prehistoric times all the way till today. It's a fabulous book. I'm going to start off the presentation by showing a couple pictures a couple Indian bulls that I have in my backyard. Where my family farmed out by Burst Park, there was an Indian village that was on our property. And it was a slough that was filled in when my grandfather bought the place in 1948. And throughout the years, as my dad and my uncle would farm that property, they would dig up these Indian bulls. And I used to joke around, I said I had service for 8 for a while. And so, you know, I have them in the backyard, and I'm looking at those, and I'm realizing there is more evidence of a prehistoric tribe living here from 1,000 years ago than what we will have as evidence of our existence 100 years from now. And so I look at those bulls, and I wonder who used them, what was going on, how did they get there, the whole story. How old are they? Are they 500 years old, 1,000 years old, 2,000 years old? I couldn't tell you. So I look at those and I think about who were the peoples that were living here at the time, and this was their tools. And when I talk about living here, let's talk about what timeline are we talking about? We're talking about 5,000 years. In 5,000 years, in our modern knowledge of history, 3,000 BC, the Egyptians' first dynasty was established. Then the first Great Pyramid was constructed 2,560 years BC. The Iron Age started 2000 BC, 4,000 years ago. The alphabet appeared 3,800 years ago. The Chinese Zhou dynasty was established. Homer writes the Iliad and the Odyssey. The first Olympic Games were held 2,700 years ago. Rome was established. The first temple of Jerusalem was built. Paper was invented. Vesuvius erupts. Gunpowder invented. The compass was invented. The Magna Carta was signed. Discovery of America, and then the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This all happened in the last 5,000 years. And while this was going on, the ancestors of the Tachiyokuts came to Central Valley and lived around Tulare Lake for 5,000 years. Now think about this history going on around the other side of the world, and over here, these people are living around the lake. And it was the Garden of Eden. This was the Garden of Eden. So I always ask, how could a Stone Age culture live unmolested for 5,000 years? How come they messed with nobody? Nobody knew they were here. And when I talk about a Stone Age culture, I'm not talking about them in a bad sense. They did not develop the use of metal. All their tools, all their clothing, everything that they used was from the environment. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So the question is, how could they stick around here and nobody messed with them for 5,000 years? Well, let's take a look at it. Thank courtesy of Google Earth, we have a snapshot here. Here's the curvature of the Earth. And right there is a little dot. Right there, that's us, okay? So kind of give you a perspective of what's going on. And if you go east of us, and there's us right there. From this point through here is 1,000 miles of the most inhospitable desert you could ever imagine. If you were living here and you just peeked over the edge and you saw this, you said, there's no way I'm going over there. There's no way. And so from this vantage point, coming from the east, there was no peoples that traveled long distance. Now there were individual tribes that lived in isolated spots here, but they stuck around where the food and water was. They were not in the travel mode. So from the east, you had 1,000 miles of desert hiding the tribe. On the west side, well, you had 5,000 miles of ocean. Here's Hawaii, nothing else. Nothing else all the way to California. And you come back here and you look north, well, you have this nice little peninsula or this little area of green, and this was a lush area, and lots of different tribes lived in this area, and they lived out this way. And why would you leave a lush area to come down here? And then you come from the south, again, desert, hot. So where the Tachi-Yokuts lived was a sweet spot of beauty. And like I said, it was the Garden of Eden. You could walk outside the front door of your hut and trip over your meal. And so, and we'll talk about what I mean by that. So, when you see, this is a artistic rendition of what California would have looked like from space in 1851. So, what you see here is you see Little Kern Lake, Buena Vista Lake. This is the Kern Slough that flowed into Tulare Lake. And then you have the tributaries of the Kauai, the Tule, the Kauai, the Kings River. This is the Fresno Slough pouring into the San Joaquin River, and it goes out to the Bay Area. So this was all fed by the snowmelt that came off the Sierra Nevadas. This area in the United States, in fact, this area in the world, is the second most sunniest place in the world. Number one is the Mojave Desert. We're talking sunny in terms of consistent, hot, dry days. And you know, living here, what I mean. You go for a year without a cloud. And this is what this is down here. So what you have is that this environment created an area for people to live and live off the land. Now, what is that?
Mud hen.
What did you say?
Mud hen.
It's a mud hen. That's exactly right. Why do I have a picture of a mud hen? Because Tachi is the Yokut's word for mud hen. The Tachis were known as the mud hens. Now, why was that? Well, because they lived around the Tulare Lake. You see right here. This was their domain. Now, this is a copy out of a book that I had that shows the Tulare Lake Basin and the different areas of villages that existed. And they would migrate between the fall and spring and the winter to different villages based upon the weather. And you know, as you know, you live here, you know, you go out to the west side in January, it's pretty nice out there. You don't want to come over the east side because it's foggy. So what I did was I overlaid these locations to a current map. So Walnut is Kettleman City. Waiu is where Cross Creek comes into the lake. Chi is where the Kings River comes into the lake. And then Golan and Auju is out west of Huron. This is where they would live, and they would migrate around this And that was their area of domain for 5,000 years. Now, as I said, they used nothing but natural materials, and this is a picture of an individual. This is a typical Yokut's camp. They had a thatch hut with a little shade, with sticks, baskets, and gentleman here, when this picture was taken in 1927, 1928, he was the last surviving full-blooded man from the Yawali tribe, and he lived in such a house until he was 16 years of age, and he supervised the construction of this camp. So again, you're looking at the cutting-edge technology of the tribes that lived here. This is an example. These are two little a boy and a girl dressed in their native costumes. It's all made by the reeds and the grasses and the sticks and everything else that was in the area here. And that was how they dressed. And that's all they needed to wear. I mean, as I said, you've been here in the summertime. You're not going to wear anything. And even in the wintertime, if it got down in the 30s, they would put something warm on, but there was never any wild weather fluctuations. Now, basketry. You can measure a Stone Age people's advancement by how sophisticated their art is. And what you have here is an example of the highest form of art that a Stone Age tribe in the world has ever created, which was their basketry. And it's fabulous stuff. I mean, you can see here just how that was all hand woven, and to be able to pick out the different grasses and weave it in, and then you look at the lid on this particular, you see how it's made. Now, if you had an empty stomach and you had to worry about where your next meal was going to come from, do you think you would have had time to figure out how to do this? No. Again, this is an example of just how fortunate they were. They lived, as I said, in the Garden of Eden. They never had to worry about where their meal was going to come from. They had the time to figure out how to do this, how to build and make such fabulous basketry. And I've got other examples here that I pulled off the internet of just how beautiful and intricate each one of these baskets are. Now, I learned that if you have a basket with people in it, that was a funeral basket. You don't do anything with it. Okay, you left it by the grave site. And then another example of more basketry that was made at the time. And so now, the other thing that they would use is this was their obsidian arrowhead. I learned reading through the handbook of the Tachiyokuts that there were two types of arrows that the Tachis made. They had arrows that they would make to hunt, and they had arrows that they would make to kill. And they did. They fought amongst each other. So an arrow that was made to hunt, the arrowhead was tied to the reed or the stick, the body of the arrow, using a sinew that was dipped in asphalt so that it became waterproof. And so when the arrow was stuck into the animal, they shot at it, the animal would try to break the arrow off, and they would break the arrow off and keep the arrow inside the animal, then they'd chase it down, and then eventually the animal would die. With a human, they did not do that. They would still stick the arrow on a stick, but they would tie it really loose with the sinew, and they would not waterproof it. So that when the arrow stuck in you, and you pulled it out, you just pulled out the stick, and you left the stone inside you, and it was to infect you and kill you. So, I mean, human nature is human nature. So, it's just an example of some of the arrowheads they had. And then they would use bones for needles and sewing stuff together, and just an example of different types of tools they made out of the natural products. This is a postcard from my collection. This is the largest collection of California Indian mortars and pestles in the world. Weighs over 10 tons. This was in Pacific Grove. I do not know what happened to that, but you can see, again, all this is stone And then they have the arrowheads and the basketry. This is a quite a valuable collection. It went up for sale today, but fortunately, a lot of these items are being returned back to the native populations.
Do they demand it?
Yeah, they demand it. You know, I've told the Tachis that I had those Indian bowls, but you know, I don't hold them in disrespect, and they're fine with that. You know, and I'm not going to sell them. If they come and get them, what can happen? I'm not worried about it. Now, one thing that most people don't know was that the Tachis and the Indians love to gamble. Yes, so when I found out about that, I said, so casinos are more like your church in terms of what's going on. And what they would do is they would make this flat basket, and they would have walnuts, half of walnuts. And so they would throw the walnuts on the basket, and depending if there was one walnut up and 3 down, or 2 up, 2 down, or whatever, they would gamble on what the next throw would be. Now, I don't know what they gamble. I mean, I didn't have it, but it was part of their life. And they would gamble. Now, I don't know if they gambled tomorrow's meal away. I don't know. I don't know. This is a picture. This is a scan from a map I have in my collection. This is a map was made in 1876. And the thing about it is that you don't see, here's Delano, here's Tipton, here's Tulare, and Goshen, and then Smiths Ferry, and Fresno, and Kingston. And so this map I'm showing here, because what I did was I kind of drew lines around it here to give you an idea of who lived in the area. So this area between the San Joaquin River and the Kings River was populated by a tribe called the Chowchilla. The Chowchilla were a tribe that mimicked the tribes of the western United States plains. They would travel and go along the grasslands here, following the deer and elk, and this was part of their life. This was their lifespan. Up here were the Wachumna. The Wachumna lived up in the foothills. They were considered to be the, quote, wealthy tribe because they had the best access to food. They had the rivers that would flow through, and the oaks for the oak trees and the acorns, and they would have the fish, and they would go to the mountains hunt for deer, and they did quite well. And then down here, the green area was where those filthy Tachis lived. And I say that because the Tachis were looked down upon because they were in the mud. Now, they would use, there was plenty to eat out here. There was plenty of food to eat. And so these tribes had this type of arrangement for thousands of years. Now up here, this was the Mono. The Mono were enemies of the Tachis, or of the Yokuts, I should say, because they were from the east side of the Sierra Nevada. So Mono-Win Casinos is a different tribe, a different peoples altogether than what's down in the valley here. This little purple area is where they would all meet every year. And where did they meet? They met at a place along the Kings River called Burrs Park. This was their meeting area. Now, the thing about Burrs Park is that as you see the river flow through here, because Burrs Park sits right in this area right here. Burrs Park is on a peninsula of the Kings River. And because it was on a peninsula, this area was green year-round. It was a beautiful place. And when you go there today, there's oak trees, and it's pretty much undisturbed since the times that people lived here with the tribes. The Burris family they purposefully did not develop this because of the spiritual nature of the Burris Park to the local tribes. And so what would happen is the 3 tribes would come and they'd meet here every year at the end of summer, and they have their big powwow, they do their trading and their meeting and their partying and have a great time. One story that I do remember was when I worked for the Santa Rosa Rancheria, one of the tribal council people, she was an older woman, and she said that when she was a little girl, her grandmother took her to Burrs Park. And while they were at Burrs Park, her grandmother said that when she was a little girl, so it would be back before the white man came, was that she used to go out and look in the river to look for the water dogs. You know, water dogs? And apparently there were, according to the tribe, there were freshwater seals that lived out there. Now I don't know. I don't know. But again, because of the isolation of this area, the beautiful topography, the water, the weather, we have no idea what species of animals existed here before we showed up. We have no clue. We don't know. Now, back on that 5,000 years, I ended with the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. It was named after the villa, Guadalupe Hidalgo, located in Mexico City, where the treaty was signed. And this was the end of the Mexican-American War. And so all this red area, Mexico seceded to the United States, and then the United States felt sad and said, we'll buy a little bit more from here. So this is when things changed for the Tachis, and not for the good. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to have a little bit of reading, and I will read along with you so that you can see what's going on. One of the first acts of government for the state of California, passed April 22nd, 1850, was an act for the government and protection of Indians. Now, that's an oxymoron. Okay, I want to read you a couple chapters here. Any person having or hereafter obtaining a minor Indian, male or female, from the parents or relations of such Indian minor, and wishing to keep it, such person shall go before the justice of the peace of his township with the parents and friends of the child, and if the justice of peace becomes satisfied that no compulsory means have been used to obtain the child from the parents, then the child shall be given, the people shall be given to such person a certificate authorizing him to have the care, custody, control, and earnings of such minor until they turn the age of majority. So this was 1850. Now basically what happened was that, hey, I can have myself a little Indian kid working for me, and I can make money off of that. Here's another item. This is when an Indian is convicted of an offense before the justice of the peace, punishable by fine, any white person may, by consent of the justice, give bond for said Indian, conditioned for the payment of said fine and costs, and in such case the Indian shall be compelled to work for the person so bailing until he has discharged and canceled the fine against him. So what happened is if an Indian got arrested and he got to pay a fine, he couldn't pay the fine, so this is, I'll pay the fine, but you got to come work for me. What does that sound like?
Exactly.
There you go.
Labor.
That's exactly right, right? It gets better. Any Indian able to work and support himself in some honest calling, not having the wherewithal to maintain himself, who shall be found loitering or strolling about or frequenting public places where liquor is sold, begging or leading to an immoral or prolific course of life, shall be liable to be arrested on the complaint of any resident citizen of the county and brought before the justice of peace. And that would authorize and require the officer having him in charge of custody to hire out such a vagrant for public mail shall be given, shall direct for the highest price that can be had for any term not exceeding 4 months. So if an Indian was arrested for loitering, he could be hired out 24 hours from the state by the best bidder for 4 months. It gets better. Here's the first governor of California. Really nice guy. This is what he said at his commencement address. That a war of extermination will continue to be waged between the races until the Indian race becomes extinct must be expected. While we cannot anticipate this result, but with painful regret, the inevitable destiny of the race is beyond the power or wisdom of man to avert. He's a nice looking guy, isn't he? And his name was Peter Hardman Burnett. Who was this guy? In 1843, Burnett led a wagon train to Oregon. He was elected to the legislature where he took the lead in passing a law that excluded African Americans from the state. The law allowed whites to keep slaves for 3 years after which they would be freed and required to leave. Any black person who refused to leave would be whipped, earning it the nickname of Peter Hartman's Burnett's Lash Law. It was rescinded. You know, we have the luxury of being armchair historians because we see now the error of our ancestors' ways. But it's disturbing to me, a lot of this stuff, as I was researching this, you know, I had heard bits and pieces, but when I actually went out and started reading it, it was worse than I could expect. All right, why do I have this old shack? This is a very important piece of history. This is Fort Barber, built in 1851. This was outside of Millerton. Now, Fort Barber, from what I remember, was dismantled, moved to Roding Park, where it sat there for about 60 or 70 years until the Table Mountain tribe acquired it, took it up, and they're remodeling it to make it part of their historical heritage. Because the Fort Barber is where the Barber Treaties were signed. Now, the Barber Treaties was a treaty made and concluded at Cap Belt on the Kings River, state of California, between George Barber, commissioner in the part of the United States, and the chiefs, captains, and headsmen of the Tachis, all the different tribes. There's 18 tribes. I got this photocopy. When I worked for the tribe, I said, hey, it was just silly me. Hey, you guys have a copy of your treaty? And the guy pulls out a book. I go, no. The treaty, the one your ancestors signed. And they just said, oh, we have no idea what that, we have no idea, we have no. And so I said, well, I'll get you one. And so what I did was, so this is, you know, just shows the treaty here, what they paid for, and this is all the different people that signed with their seal, which is basically an X. And so I was able to get a copy of the actual treaty. See, the treaty at Camp Bell, right there. Treaty made and concluded Camp Bell, Kings River, between, and so now here is written, handwritten out by Colonel Barber, what they were going to give for for signing the treaty. And here's all the signatures that they had. They're marks. They all marked with their X right there. Okay.
Wow.
And there's Colonel Barber's signature right there. So what did they sign for? The treaty gave the Native Americans of California, the 18 tribes, these little spots of land for them to live in. All right? No big deal. 1851, 1852, this was a swamp, bad area, no crazy. Well, what happened was, is by the time the treaty got back to Washington, D.C., people realized, hey, wait a minute, that's some pretty nice farmland. We don't be giving that to them. So here is the executive, this is from the Senate Secretary, basically saying that they did not ratify the treaty. This document basically says that they are not going to ratify the treaties. And that was the beginning of the end right there. Because what happened was that the tribes said, hey, we went with you in good faith to sign the treaty. The United States government said, no, we're not going to ratify it. You guys are on your own. So what I did was, now this is where it gets really hard to find stuff because there's not too much written about the Indians. And so I did some research, a lot of research on newspapers.com. And what I have here is examples of newspaper articles of events that happened in this area. And I'm going to read them to you because this is where it gets pretty difficult. This is from the July 17, 1852 San Joaquin Republican. This is from, it says, some few days since, the chief and several of his men came across Kings River and ordered a gentleman by the name of Campbell, who established a ferry across the river, to take down his ferry route, stating that the country belonged to his people and he did not want Americans to cross the Kings River. He gave Campbell 2 days to leave the river and told him unless he removed his line within that specified time, it would have to be removed, and made the use of threatening attitudes. Mr. Campbell immediately came over to the San Joaquin River and informed the miners what had taken place, and So the miners got together and they reached Rancheria on reaching Rancheria with an interpreter. We desired a friendly talk and requested the headman to go with us to the Kings River, where we were informed that several more of our countrymen would meet them and that we desired nothing but peace. The chief refused to go, and immediately the warriors commenced gathering up their bows and arrows with every indication of hostility. We thought it better at this juncture to convince them that we were ready for war if they desired it, and opened fire upon them, and after a fierce conflict of a few minutes, they fled to the mountains, leaving some of their number dead on the ground, and one of our party receiving a slight wound in the arm from an arrow. This is the earliest newspaper article I found of a skirmish between the Native Americans and the people coming into the valley. This is May 4th, 1853, from the Indian Commissioner. I turn to the condition of the Indians of California and the necessity of doing something for their relief and protection. Their condition is truly deplorable. Driven from their hunting and fishing grounds, in danger of starving, many of them have made to work entirely without compensation, and continually massacres going on. To give an account, if all these is impossible, I shall chiefly have recourse to official reports hereof made on the sample of what is done. New mode of oppression of the Indians, of catching them like cattle and making them work, turning them out to starve and die when the work season was over. 5/4/1853, San Joaquin Republican. These Indians were offered by their captors to farmers in the neighborhood to hire for $1 a day, but that price was considered too high for being so low in flesh. And rather than lower the price, they were allowed to starve as reported. It is a common practice, I know to be such, to catch Indian children when they are out gathering acorns and take and hold them as slaves. There was, I did not have the opportunity to do research on this, but I had, through the readings, there was an active slave market of Native Americans in Southern California to the 1870s. So I looked high and low to find something about that. I haven't been able to see anything that I could point to, but there was something like that going on in Southern California. 1856 San Joaquin Republican. Near Millerton, Fort Miller. I have just time to say that the Four Creeks Indians are going to work in earnest. 28 soldiers sent there a few days ago under the second command of Lieutenant Livingston have not succeeded in quelling their disposition for fighting. The Indians have commenced burning down and plundering the houses of inhabitants while the men are out hunting them down. Volunteers will leave here today for Tulare as Mr. Poindexter came to town for aid. A field howitzer was set up last night by the commanding officer of the fort, and a messenger started from here to raise volunteers at Fine and Coarse Gold Gulches and the Fresno. There is a general stir here, and every man who can get an animal right is going. All the families on the Kings Rivers are collecting here, and some from Four Creeks. 25 men left here this morning for the seat of war. Four Creeks is Three Rivers. That's what they call the area. This continues on. Between the San Joaquin and Kings River, I met a body of citizens from Lake County driving and hauling some 200 Lake and Lower Kings River Indians to the reservation on the Fresno. That would be by Chowchilla. The Indians, it said, have been killing hogs and cattle at a considerable extent. The Indian authorities had promised but neglected to remove them, and the citizens found it necessary to remove them at their own expense. This movement may soon become necessary for this neighborhood and the adjoining mountains. A large number of stock in this country consumes every acorn almost as soon as it falls and keeps the grass eaten down so low as to prevent it going to seed. You know the Indians' main dependence is upon acorns and grass seed. Those gone, what is he to live on? And one thing is certain, if the proper Indian authorities do not attend to their removal, the citizens will have to do it. Okay. A couple more articles. This is December 1858. You will recollect that early in November, the people of Lower Kings River collected and moved at their own expense some 200 Indians from their neighborhood who had been killing their hogs and cattle. A portion of them were permitted to return, not by the citizens, and the agent, Judge Lewis, was notified that under no circumstances could they be allowed to remain after the 10th. By the last day named, the judge arrived with wagons and moved some 60 of them to the upper Kings River with orders to them to go into the mountains nearby, and he left for home to send over from the San Joaquin the balance of the thieving tribe. Let's talk about this here. This particular paragraph answered a question that I had wondered when I worked for the Tachi tribe. When the Tachi started making good money with the casinos, one of the first things they kept talking about was being able to provide money for a particular Indian reservation that's outside of Pine Flat called the Cold Springs Indian Reservation. If you've ever been at the Cold Springs Indian Reservation, it's the size of this library. That's the land. Why they were concerned about that was those were cousins of their ancestors that were forced to go hide in the mountains. And they wanted to make sure that they would take care of them in any way possible. And so it wasn't until I read this article that it clicked as to why they were concerned about a tribe that was out of the valley. Let's see here. By night, nearly all the Watokis, the worst thieves, the rascals of the country, and a portion of the Low-Techs were under guard and camped with the Lake Indians. The next day, Judge Lewis arrived and undertook argument to convert the people to his way of thinking. He admitted injustice of seeing 200 thieving Indians among us, but he refused to take charge of the Watokis. So again, what's happening is he's like, I don't know what to do with these people. Right? The judge then offered to move the Lake Indians at once and the others by the 1st of February if they were allowed to disperse. He answered that on a former occasion that the people were forced to drive these Indians. Colonel Henley had publicly pledged himself to the neighborhood assembled that if they would allow only 6 Indians to come to the government farm to gather the crop, he would move the Watokis immediately and all the balance in 30 days. So he's trying to get these people out. Let's see here. This is a gentleman present told him that the people there who were familiar with Indians at the fairs believed that if the appropriation of Congress was honestly devoted to the Indians, it would be amply sufficient to meet all their wants and keep them out of mischief, and such was his own notion. Everybody knew that there was nothing for them to eat in that place and that they would be permitted to leave in small parties and soon scatter over the cattle range. So I laugh about this because he says, hey, if Congress was spending their money properly, we'd have plenty of money, resources to feed them, but it's not happening. He was then informed that these Indians would be moving expense to the citizens to the present reservation under no circumstances would be allowed to return to the Kings River. Throughout, the Indians were treated with the utmost kindness and none of their property destroyed except their wigwams, which they were informed they could never inhabit afterwards. Judge Lewis made a remark that ought to be known throughout the whole state where Indians were troublesome. It was this, that it was no longer the policy of the superintendent to concentrate the Indians on reservations and teach them how to support themselves, but to scatter them in small bands over the country and let them subsist themselves. All right. Kingston. I was talking with one of you here about Kingston. How many of you have ever heard of the community of Kingston? Oh, a couple. Okay, so let me explain something. Kingston. That was the first settlement in the Central Valley. It was established in 1850, and by 1890 it was gone. There's a park there today. It's called the Layton Kingston Park. And so this shows that this is along the Kings River. This is the Kings River here. And then what I did was I superimposed this portion of the Kingston map over the Kings River. This is the Santa Fe Railroad track that goes through Layton. So this is Layton. And then this is the road that comes out of Hanford and crosses the Kings River right here. So Kingston was a community where there was the Kingston grade road. You can see the original road comes to the map and crosses over right here. So
wasn't there a ferry there on Kings River?
You ask, and there it is.
They had a battle over that.
Yeah. Oh yes, we're going to talk about that. So this is the only photo I've ever found of the Kingston Ferry, and so there was a rope that went across the river And this guy had a crank where the rope would go through, and he would crank the boat back and forth across the river. And it's just a fabulous photo. I can't believe I was able to get a copy of this. I wish I had the original. I was happy to get a copy. So, originally it was called Whitmore's Ferry. It wasn't called the Kingston Ferry. Owned by Lucius Albert Whitmore, born August 1820 in Connecticut. He married Susan Jane Smith in 1846. She died in childbirth in 1847, leaving Lucius with his son Marcellus. He left his son with his parents and moved to Stockton in 1850. 1854, 1855, he established the ferry that was located 1 mile west of where Layton is now. It became a natural trading post, and the town was originally named Whitmore. Name changed to Kingston after the Kings River. Now, why did they change the name? Murder on the Kings River. L.A. Whitmore, proprietor of the Whitmore's Ferry in the Lower Kings River, was murdered in his own house on about the 27th of January by Dr. Workman. It seems, says the Mariposa Gazette, that a difficulty originated out of the recent Indian disturbances in that region. Whitmore was opposed to the removal of Indians, hence a feud arose between him and those in favor of that measure. An Indian boy in the service of Whitmore had caught a pig in snares set to catch geese, and the anti-Indian party intended to make Whitmore responsible for the act, assembling at his house some 12 or 15 in number. Whitmore closed the doors and forbid their entrance, upon which the mob broke in the door. Workman fired at Whitmore, killing him instantly. Workman fled immediately. Whitmore is said to have been unarmed. Now, more to the story. A correspondent for San Francisco National Chronicle says L.A. Whitmore, formerly the owner of Whitmore's Ferry, was recently shot in his own house by Dr. Workman, one of the leaders of the Lower Kings River anti-Indian men, backside 10 or 15 party, for no other cause yet known than to gratify the evil passage of the mob. Serious fears are entailed that the lawless disposition and interference of a few men in Kings River who have arrayed themselves against the helpless Digger Indians will force the employees and Indians to abandon the Kings River at Windian Farm, resulting in the loss of promised crop and perhaps government property. This is a fearful anticipation, and if enforced, would be a great outrage against the laws of the state and the United States. More of this. I didn't copy the article that said that Whitmore had an Indian wife. He did not want her removed from the house. And so they killed him and took her away. I don't know what happened after that. So there's this Dr. Workman. I don't know who this guy is. I would love to find out more about him, because he obviously had some influence over Indian policy, which was not for the best for the Indians at that time. This is a Digger Indian. They called them diggers because they dug in the ground. This is a picture that I have in my collection. It's identified as California Digger Indians, but I don't know exactly where it's at. That's not a great place to live, but that's what they had. This is a picture that I found in one of my clients' photo albums. I was blown away when I saw it. This is the Santa Rosa Rancheria Mission Church, where the Santa Rosa Rancheria is now. And what we have here is an assembly of the tribe at that time, and what they were celebrating was the birth of this woman with her twins. It's a fabulous event. I've asked many people at the reservation about this event, and no one would talk to me about it. And finally, somebody pulled me aside and said, these poor children died right after this picture was taken.
Oh.
And it is considered bad karma to discuss the dead, and that's why nobody talks about it. And it's such a wonderful picture, because it shows all the tribal members sitting here, and you know, if I did a little bit more research, I could probably figure out who the priest is there, and there's this little white girl amongst the Native Americans, and there's this woman right here. And so The tribe has a similar picture that was taken the same day, but it's not. It's like they took multiple pictures. So I've seen the one the tribe has. It goes, well, the one I have is different. So it's a great photo. Sad story to say the least. Here's a close up here. We can see more of the faces of everybody else in there. Here's a gaming tray, a basket. This is the Tachi School that was on the Indian reservation. That was the school they had. That was the public education provided by the County of Kings or the County of Tulare, and that was what they had. Picture out of my collection showing a Native American woman somewhere in Lemoore with her young child. This is another one that shows an elderly woman with a daughter or a couple kids. And this is a couple of tribal members living up in the hills. That was their tent. That's where they lived. And then showing the baskets that they made and how they were making the baskets. I'm going to close out with two more pictures here. And this is a picture that I would love to find the original photo of, because this is Sunil, a Tachi medicine man and rainmaker from the north shore of the Tulare Lake. He was born and died at the old Tachi village of Wau. He was also known as Bautista and was probably one of the signers of the Camp Barber Treaty in 1851. And the last picture I have here is of a man I got to know quite well. He's passed on now. Clarence Atwell Jr. He was the tribal chairman and medicine man. The man had a magic about him, and he will go down in the history of the tribe as being the one that was able to pull them out of poverty into the casinos that they have. So, and that's my story.
Wonderful.
Any questions? Any questions?
Atwell's Island
Ah, yes.
in Tulare Lake.
Okay.
Is that named after his family? Or?
I cannot answer that, but I will tell you, Atwell, the island of Atwell was named after an attorney in Tulare County whose last name was Atwell himself.
Oh, okay.
And so I do not know if the Atwell name that went with Clarence Atwell had anything to do with the Atwell who had the island out in Tulare Lake. That in itself was a story about him. Atwell had a boat built at Waukena to ferry the lake with people, and did quite well with that while the lake existed. So, but I've never found a picture of it. Yes, what's that?
Atwell is kind of a big day around Three River.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's actually Atwell. In fact, the only physical artifact of any boat that was on Tulare Lake is now sitting up at Atwell Mills at Mineral King. The steam engine that ran the mill up there was the steam engine that ran the boat on Tulare Lake. That's the only artifact of anything on the Tulare Lake that I'm aware of. Now, there could be others, but that's not what I know.
I was told that there was a steamboat that would go up and down that water channel up to the Bay Area.
Well, there was steamboats that ran from Fireball up to Sacramento all the time. But once you got past Fireball, the water flow from the Kings River and the San Joaquin River was not consistent enough to allow boats to do regular travel. It was kind of like the high spot.
You had to offload your crop.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you know why there's a little suburb way out east of Fresno, and it's called Squaw Valley,
Yes.
but they changed the name to Yokuts? Any reason?
Well, they changed it recently to Yokuts? Okay, well, I don't know, but you know, the tribes of the area here, because there's descendants of the tribes here, and Yokuts is the word which means peoples. So you would say the Yokuts is the peoples, and that's their name, that's their race is the Yokuts. So you have the Tachi Yokuts, and Wachumna Yokuts. Any other question? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again.